Welcome to the You at Your Best podcast. I'm your host, Morgan. Before we get into the episode, let me give a little bit of an introduction for anyone who's new. If you like listening to someone process life in real time, or you are neurodivergent, an overthinker, a perfectionist, or maybe feel things deeply, this is the podcast for you. This is a non-professional, very human podcast about choosing authenticity over performance. My goal is to remind you to always come back to yourself. I talk about very deep things. I don't avoid vulnerability, but I trust you to know what resonates, what feels safe, and what might be too much for you right now. And I also share a journal prompt at the end of every single episode to help you think. So join me if you want to create a life that actually feels like you, so that you can become you at your best. All right, let's go ahead and get into this week's episode. For this week's episode, I'm going to be sharing things that I would tell my younger self. This is a fun episode, so I can just do whatever I want, talk about whatever I want. And I think next week I'll probably make a second fun episode just to kind of keep myself on track. I made an Instagram post about some of these things, so some of these things that I'm going to say are on that post, but I just wanted to share it on here. So the first one I have is, you are lovable and you matter just as you are. You don't have to change yourself to feel loved by the right people. Whenever I was younger, I felt like there was something inherently wrong with me. Like I needed to change because I spent so much time around people that made me feel like the way that I communicated and the way that my brain naturally processes the world was an inconvenience to everyone. And whenever that happened and people would constantly kind of have the same response to me, I started to believe that I was wrong and I was unlovable and I had to change myself for other people. And for me, creating this podcast was my way of finally letting myself be exactly who I am and realizing that there are so many more people like me and I'm not this unique, different person. And that was very healing, knowing that I'm not alone in a lot of my experiences. The next one that I have is that life can be ordinary and still be magical. You don't have to always have plans to be happy. I am someone who gets really bad FOMO. It's weird. I get the fear of missing out, but I also get the joy of missing out. It kind of just depends. But I've spent my whole life kind of chasing this feeling that I feel like I can never feel. Like the feeling is never satisfied. It just wants more and more. And I don't really know what that feeling is or where it comes from. And whenever I would be on like vacation, I would feel this insane amount of grief because I felt like the vacation wasn't what it was supposed to be, or it should have felt more magical. And it was almost like I was having such a hard time being present in what was actually happening because I was always wishing for something better, even if I ended up doing exactly what I wanted. Like I've loved shopping my entire life, and then I would go shopping and I would feel like this isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I have been spending weeks being excited about. And sometimes it would get close to fulfilling that feeling, but it just never did. So something that I've been learning is that ordinary life is where the magic is. There's nothing else that I have to chase. There's nothing else that I have to look for. This moment right now is the magic. Even if it doesn't feel extravagant and amazing and thrilling, I don't have to always create something or have plans or do something else to make myself happy. I have to learn to be happy right now in this moment. The next one that I have is, you are allowed to trust your gut. Other people may not understand your decisions, but you have always known. I am someone who is very intuitive. I feel like I have a good balance of intuition and intellect. So my intuition isn't just emotions, it's also logic. So I, for a long time, felt like I couldn't trust myself because maybe the decisions that I was making didn't seem to other people like the right decision, like leaving a friendship because I didn't feel emotionally safe in who I was, or moving in with my boyfriend, or getting our own apartment, or whenever I got pregnant, choosing to have her and become the best version of me that I can be, or whenever I chose to leave college even though I hadn't finished it yet. whenever I chose to start my podcast, a lot of my decisions have been unconventional, but I've learned over time that whenever I started trusting those decisions and stopped worrying about what other people might think about them, I learned that I can trust myself and I do have good judgment and I do know what's best for me. A lot of people will make us feel like we don't really know what's best for ourselves and they know better for us, but no one knows better for you than you know for yourself, because you know yourself better than anyone else. And sometimes we can make the wrong decision, and that's okay. Sometimes making the wrong decision leads us to the right decision. It's an important lesson to remember that we can trust ourselves and we can be logical and emotional at the same time. The next one that I have is, you aren't bad for having feelings. You have just been around people who made you believe you aren't allowed to express them in your unique way. So, like I talked about before, I process things in a different way than most people. And like I learned that the way that I process the world is actually pretty common. But for most of the people in my life, I felt like such an outsider because it felt like no one truly understood my brain. For a long time, because of that, I felt like the way that I would express how I feel was wrong. If I would just be direct and honest about my emotions, people would get really upset or think that I'm saying something that I'm not. And it was really confusing. And because I would constantly get like backlash anytime I would try to talk about how I felt, I started learning maybe how I feel is wrong. And I'm learning now that how I feel isn't wrong. And what was happening was that those people didn't understand the way that I process the world and the way that I communicate. And that's not to say that I think that I should just disown those people, or if we feel misunderstood by people, we should just make them out to be the villain and move on. Sometimes it's totally okay to learn how to communicate in a way that another person understands. But what's not fair is for it to be expected of the person who maybe processes or communicates differently to be the only one that is making an effort. And I've found that throughout a lot of my life, it has felt like in social situations, I'm the only one who is making a conscious effort to change, while the other person is constantly villainizing me or making me out to be bad just because they can't understand what I'm saying or they process in a different way than me. And that's where I think it's not fair. And that's where I think it can create trauma for neurodivergent people or people who think differently. And it's just not fair to always assume the worst about people. But what I would tell younger me if I could go back in time is that she's not wrong just because other people don't understand her. And that there are people out there who do understand her and who know what she's talking about and who think she's brilliant even. The next one that I have is, you never needed someone to save you. You just needed to have enough self-trust to build the life that you have always wanted. I feel like I've spent a lot of my life dreaming of being saved from my life. Someone finding me and swooping me off my feet and changing everything for me, and I never have to do it myself. But I've learned as I've gotten older that if that were to happen, if someone were to just completely save me, I wouldn't have been happy anyways, because I wouldn't be the one in the driver's seat of my life. I've learned that I'm someone that needs autonomy and to be able to create life in a way that works for me. So I would have just been burnt out and uncomfortable if someone did save me like I wanted. All I needed was to just trust myself. I know what I want and I know what I want my life to feel like. No one else can do that for me. No one else can give that to me. Of course, it's okay to utilize help. And I'm not saying that we just become hyper independent, because that's an issue for me too. We can 100% accept help from people, but not help that isn't actually helpful. The next one that I have is, keep expressing yourself. Self-expression is how you find yourself. Whenever I was in college, I started kind of experimenting with my style, and I started listening to different types of music and putting myself out there in a way that I never did before. And whenever that was happening, some people in my life made me feel like they were making fun of me. And I just felt so bad about myself, like maybe I was doing it wrong. And I wish I could go back and tell her that she was doing exactly what she needed to do to find herself. And go back to me whenever I was in college wearing some really horrendous outfits and telling her to just own it, because this is how she learns who she is. The next one that I have is you are so much stronger than you believe you are. You get yourself through so much hardship, but you will also learn that it's okay to let people in and let people help you. This is so important because for a long time I thought I was weak and I thought that I wasn't someone that could protect myself. Looking back, I realized that even as a kid, everyone always told me that I was weak. I remember people would always kind of expect the least from me because they didn't believe that I could do better. I became a really intense people pleaser. So if I could go back in time, I would tell my younger self that she is so much stronger than she thinks she is. And the way that she adapted and the way that she ended up becoming a bit of a people pleaser or being scared to put herself out there, although she was suffering, she wasn't weak for doing that. That's actually a very intelligent thing that we do whenever we go through trauma to protect ourselves. And I also wish I could go back to me whenever I got a little bit older and tell her that she's allowed to accept help from people. She doesn't have to fear people controlling her or taking over her life. Some people genuinely care and some people genuinely want to help without taking away who she is. The next one that I have is you are going to be an incredible mom. You don't have to worry that your trauma will pass down to your daughter. You will make sure that it doesn't. And I think it's fair to say that as parents, we can't always protect our kids and parents are always going to make mistakes. No parent is perfect. But whenever I first found out that I was pregnant, I was so terrified of me not being healed enough to be a good mom. And whenever I first had her and she was in the NICU because my daughter was born premature, I was so scared and I didn't trust myself and I was dealing with so many mental health struggles and I just felt like I'm never going to be able to do this. But at the same time, I did have some trust in myself. Basically, my entire pregnancy, all I did was listen to podcasts about parenthood and child psychology to make sure that I could be the best mom that I could. And because I did all of that, I am a good mom today. But I would have been a good mom even if I didn't learn any of those things. So I wish I could go back to whenever I first had her or whenever I first found out that I was pregnant and just tell her that everything is going to be okay and her mental health gets better and life just gets better and better for her. The next one is no amount of anxiety will change the outcome of a situation. I feel like for me and a lot of people who deal with anxiety, we almost believe that if we feel anxious and if we keep on thinking about it, if something that we're terrified of happens, we'll be ready for it. Maybe we think that it can somehow change the outcome. But something that I've learned, and I wish I could go back and tell myself, is that there's nothing that I can do to change what happens. Sometimes things just happen and it sucks, but being anxious all the time and being scared all the time and not actually living my life, that was making it 10 times worse. Constantly feeling terrified doesn't change anything except for make the person with anxiety suffer. The last one that I wrote down, you don't have to abandon yourself just because you felt like your feelings were wrong and other people's were right. There's always more than one truth. I have been through a lot of experiences where I would abandon myself because I felt like I was wrong. I was told that the way that I communicate or the way that I process or my emotions and me expressing them was wrong. I would tell people how I feel and then all of a sudden I was being made out to be a horrible person and I was so confused. And I started abandoning myself and believing automatically that other people were right and I was wrong. I wish I could go back and tell myself that I wasn't wrong and I was allowed to express how I felt and how I felt was just as important as how the other person felt. Okay, and that's all that I have written down, but I really hope you enjoy it. I really hope this is helpful in some way. I know I'm kind of just talking about myself and my past self, but I'd like to think, hopefully, that whenever I talk about my experiences or my past self and I'm like kind of hyper specific about my experience, that maybe even one person listens to that and they feel understood. For this week's journal prompt, I didn't prepare one. I completely forgot. But I want you to write down some things that you would tell your younger self. And if you want to use some things that I said for inspiration, please do that. And also, I feel like I don't say this enough on my podcast, but if anyone ever wants to message me about like the journal prompt that you write and you're excited about it and you want to share it with someone and you want to message it to me or comment it on Spotify, please do that. I would be so happy to see, or even if it's not about a journal prompt and you just want to message me and talk to me, please do. I want everyone who listens to my podcast to know that I care so deeply about you, and it is so important to me that you are okay and that you are thriving and that you're finding your best life. I think that's why a lot of the time on my podcast, I tend to try not to tell people what to do. Sometimes that kind of happens, but it's in a way of like what I would tell my younger self to do. But I do that because I think it's important for all of us to have autonomy in our lives and to be able to make decisions for ourselves and to feel like we're finally trusted whenever we've spent a lot of time maybe not feeling like people trusted us, or maybe not being able to trust ourselves. Okay, that's all for today. If something in this episode resonated, share it with a friend who needs a little reminder that they're not alone. If you want more conversations like these, be sure to follow and rate this podcast. Downloading this episode is one of the best ways to help this podcast grow, so be sure to do that. If you want to find me on social media, all of my links are in my link tree in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next Sunday.